These are the best players for every CDL franchise that we've seen over the last 5 years. I went back through every CDL franchise's history and picked the 4 best players, or the 4 players that I think best encompass an all-time team for each franchise. And if you want more CDL content like this, definitely sub to the channel. We're on the road to 5K subs. But let's kick it off, and we will start with OGLA, Optic Gaming Los Angeles, which was only in the league for a couple seasons. And for me, the team has to be TJ, Kenny, Slasher, and Dashy. That was like kind of the core of their roster for those 2 seasons, and were really the only ones that were able to really have any success, if you even want to call it that, on the pro level. OGLA doesn't really have a lot of history, so that one was pretty simple. Now for another franchise that is no longer in the league, it is the Dallas Empire. This one I also think was pretty easy. It's kind of unfair to only pick 4 players for them, because obviously their best season by far was when there was a 5v5 league. So Shotzi, Hook, Illy, Krim, and Clay, you have to pick all 5. You really had to narrow it down to 4. I guess you take Krim over Clay just because he played for them longer, but I think you got to go with all 5 of them that won them that ring. Now let's talk about the Boston Breach, our newest franchise. Well, kind of newest franchise, newest totally new franchise in the league, right? Obviously, like the Ravens rebranded and stuff, but the Boston Breach, this one, they had a fair bit of players. Boston has not had any success. They're the only CDL franchise, I believe, thus far to not make a grand finals at all. So for me, I went with TJ Halley, Methods, Nero, and then honestly for the 4th, and this one, you could really go with a couple different people here, but I want to go with Doug Sensor Martin. Even though Doug hasn't played for the Breach on the pro level, I feel like he's by far the biggest face of their franchise, has been with them in Challengers, now after he retired, still doing content with them. Honestly, major shout out to Doug. I feel like he's brought a lot of eyes to the Boston Breach and has worked with them a ton over the years. So I'm putting Doug on that 4th spot, even though he never played pro with them. Moving on to the London Royal Ravens / the Carolina Ravens. Carolina's still pretty new, that part of the franchise, so none of those players are going to be making it. But for the London Royal Ravens, it's going to be Trey Zero, Scraps, Wuskin, and Dylan. I think those 4 really kind of played for the team the longest, had the most success or most, longer or deeper runs into tournaments for this franchise. Scraps, Wuskin, Dylan obviously haven't played for the franchise in quite a couple years now, but they were really great in Modern Warfare for this franchise. And then Trey Zero, I think, has been a staple of this team over the entirety of the CDL, other than this year, obviously. So had to include him. Now to talk about the Paris / Las Vegas Legion. Las Vegas Legion have been around for a couple years, so one of those guys is going to be making the team. Actually, 2 of those guys, and that is going to be Donnie Temp as well as Clayster. Temp obviously was probably their best player on this whole franchise, maybe the entirety of the time they've been in the league, but especially recently. Clayster, couple big moments on the franchise, sort of helping them turn it around last year, have a little bit of broke my heart against LA Thieves last season. And then the other 2 are going to be Denz and Luca. Those guys played for the team back in the day and were actually able to have them some sort of success on LAN at events and in the MW season, so had to throw them in there. Now for the other roster that had a bit of a rebrand, it's the Florida / Miami Heretics. No one on Miami is going to make it. They just haven't been around long enough. No disrespect to them. They definitely could one day. But for me, there's 5 guys really in competition for this spot. The 4 I lean towards is going to be HAVOK, Skies, Pharaoh, and Frosty. Those 4 were 4 that won them their 3 championships back in the day. Wake is the 5th one that I was considering, because Wake obviously won 2 with them as well. And also was kind of on them for a period of time there, like with Skies and HAVOK. We're kind of putting up some numbers. Pharaoh, Frosty, Skies, and HAVOK are the core 4 that won them 3 events back in Modern Warfare, so I want to include them first. Now to talk about the LA Gorillas. LAG, I think this one is really straightforward. It's going to be the 4 that won them their championship back in Vanguard, Slasher, Asim, Hook, and Spart. This is the only time I believe LAG has ever even made a final. So considering that was their only finals and their only win, those 4 obviously are the all-time team. Now to talk about the Minnesota Rocker. And this one, similar to LAG, kind of the same thing. It's going to be the 4 that pulled off the Minnesota Miracle, the craziest comeback we've ever seen in a grand finals in Call of Duty. Attach, Priesta, Major Maniac, and Standy. Honorable mention to Accuracy, who has been back and forth with this team for a while now. Always been like a staple to their team. The Minnesota Miracle team pulled off the greatest comeback we've probably ever seen in COD. I mean, coming down from 4-0 in the grand finals to a reverse sweep a very strong Toronto Ultra team. Major shout out to those 4 guys. I had to put them on the all-time team. And speaking of the Toronto Ultra, this one is actually a little bit tough. There are 5 guys that I really want to consider for this team. I think 2 that 100% have to be considered are obviously going to be Kleenex and Insight. Those guys have been a consistent variable on this team throughout the entirety of the time they've been in the league, and has made this team a very, very good team year in and year out. And then the other 3, it kind of comes down to Bance, Cammy, and Scrap, right? Bance and Cammy obviously had success with the team. And then when they were phased out, Scrap came in and then obviously has had success with the team. So you could put any of those guys in. They've all gotten second place at champs. They've all won events. So really, you could do any of those that you want. So I think all 5 of them are deserving of being on an all-time list for the Ultra. For the Seattle Surge, another team that I think really has 5 that are very deserving of being on this team. I think their major winning team of Accuracy, Pred, Sib, and Mac obviously won them their only major, so needs to be talked about in this conversation. But then also Octane, who spent a few years on this team and was one of the best players in the game on those years, just never really had any team success. So I wanted to throw him in there as maybe he's the honorable mention to this team, as he never actually had the team success. But that dude was like top 5 year in, year out. Just his team never really went anywhere. And now for Atlanta FaZe, I think this one is pretty straightforward. It's going to be the Abizi, Simp, Celium, Arcides roster that obviously won them champs. The quote-unquote dynasty roster, if that's what you want to consider them. I think this one's pretty simple. I guess you could maybe talk about Slasher since they won an event last year, but I wouldn't even consider it. Maybe Pre-Star Major Maniac from the MW season, since they had a pretty good year that year as well. But I think that Cold War roster is by far the all-time team for FaZe. Now for the New York Subliners, this one, another one, very simple. It's going to be the MW2 team from last year, Hydra, Kismet, Priest, and Skies. Obviously, the Subliners have some history. They've had guys like Krim, Clay, all play for their team, but that team last year won half of the events, including champs. They have to be the all-time roster for this team. Second to last team on the list, it's going to be the LA Thieves, and just like I said for the last ones, it's going to be the championship winning roster, Envoy, Kenny, Draza, and Octane. I mean, these guys won 3 events for the Thieves, one of those being COD champs, obviously. There's no one else you could put on here because they were horrible in Cold War. They obviously had a great year in Vanguard. They had a decent year last year in MW2, and then this year has been too short and obviously not very good. So it's going to be that championship winning team. And last but not least, the fan favorite team for most people is going to be OPTIC. I combined OPTIC Chicago, OPTIC Texas, and the Chicago Huntsman for this. I don't want to hear it about Dallas Empire, the merger, all this stuff. Whoever Hex owned, that is the real OPTIC team. And if you're a true Call of Duty fan, you recognize that. So this is the Hex-owned OPTIC team all time. And this one, there's definitely a few options you could go for. But for me, I'm going with SCUMP, Formal, Envoy, and Arcides. This team, I think, had the most success. If you want to throw in Shotzi or Illy or Dashy because of like Vanguard or Dashy from Cold War, I guess you could kind of do that. But I think SCUMP, Formal, Envoy, and Arcides had the most success on this team and were kind of the 4 front runners for me as being the all-time OPTIC squad. But yeah, those are my all-time CDL franchise teams. Let me know what you think. If there's one you really disagree with in the comments, definitely drop it down there. I'd love to know who you kind of have over maybe some of the guys I put. But I think my teams were pretty good. I'm not going to lie to you. So if you enjoy this type of content, like I said, sub to the channel. Like 98% of people who watch my videos are not subbed. So it's absolutely free and easy to click that sub button down below so you see the rest of my CDL content if this is something you enjoy. With all that being said, hopefully I'll see you all in the next video.